So, usually when we talk about experiencing a loss, there's a certain clarity to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely, like a tangible thing.
Right. Like say you drop a prized antique vase.
Yeah.
It shatters all over the floor, and you're undeniably sad that the vase is gone. It's just the loss of a possession, plain and simple.
Right, you lost the item.
But imagine if, when you dropped that vase, the antique shop owner didn't just ask you to pay for it, but they looked you dead in the eye and said, "You broke this because you are fundamentally clumsy, you are unworthy of holding nice things," and everyone in the store just saw it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, suddenly the event is no longer about a broken vase at all.
Exactly.
The entire scenario has been transformed into this, like, devastating indictment of your character.
It becomes a completely different kind of wound. And that's exactly what we're looking at today. We are taking a deep dive into the psychology of romantic rejection, which is, a wound almost every single one of us has experienced, but very few of us actually understand.
Yeah, it's universally felt but rarely analyzed.
Right. So we have an incredibly insightful stack of source material to guide us today, specifically a really deep analysis from Psychology Today by Dr. Aaron Benziev. And the mission for us on this deep dive is to figure out exactly why romantic rejection hurts as much as it does.
Which is a huge question.
It
Well,
really is, because, we live in a world full of billions of people, right? Infinite romantic alternatives, dating apps on every single phone in our pockets. So why does one single person saying no feel like an actual existential
right,
crisis?
it feels like the end of the world.
It totally does. So we're going to uncover the surprising psychology behind ghosting, and we'll look at why that tired old cliche, it's not you, it's me, actually holds a massive amount of scientific weight.
Yeah, to get to those answers, we really have to rethink what we are actually losing when someone declines a romantic connection. The pain of rejection isn't what we typically assume it is.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this was honestly the first huge revelation for me in Dr. Benziev's research. Yeah, because before we can look at how people reject each other, we have to uncover the mechanism of why it registers as such a massive blow to the psyche. And the analogy that really jumped out at me is that being rejected romantically, it feels less like losing a prized possession, meaning, the partner themselves, and more like someone suddenly holding up a funhouse mirror that makes you look terrible.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. It's a direct attack on our ego, not just our relationship status.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the root of the pain stems directly from adopting a negative view of oneself. I mean, from an evolutionary standpoint, human beings are incredibly social creatures.
Right. We need the pack to survive.
Exactly. Historically, being rejected by the tribe or a mate meant isolation, which, often equaled death. So our brains are hardwired to interpret social devaluation as a severe, literal
It
threat.
makes so much sense.
Yeah, so when someone declines a romantic connection, the brain's default reaction isn't some logical, oh, well, we have incompatible communication styles.
Wish it was.
Right. But no, the amygdala often bypasses logic entirely and just screams, I am fundamentally flawed.
Which is such a brutal cognitive leap to make. You go from, they don't want to date me to, I am objectively unlovable.
Yeah, and this is why Dr. Benzev breaks down the architecture of this pain into three primary dimensions that basically dictate just how much a rejection is going to traumatize us.
Okay, lay them out for us.
So the first is delivery. Like, is the rejection direct and communicated clearly, or is it indirect, like fading away into silence?
Right, the classic fade out.
Exactly. Then the second is scope. Are they rejecting the entire relationship, like the whole package of who you are, or are they rejecting a specific aspect, like a sexual advance?
Okay, got it. Delivery and scope.
And the third dimension is tone. Is the delivery warm and affirming, or is it dismissive and distancing?
So it's essentially like a sliding scale for emotional damage.
Pretty much, yeah.
Depending on the delivery, the scope, and the tone, you could be, mildly bummed out for a Tuesday afternoon, or you could be plunged into an absolute 6-month psychological tailspin.
Exactly. And a detail in the research that completely subverts the standard narrative is that this process is emotionally taxing for both parties.
Which is wild because we have this tendency to view the person doing the rejecting as this cold, unfeeling entity holding all the cards.
Right, the ice queen or the heartless guy. But the psychological reality is quite the opposite. The person doing the rejecting often experiences intense discomfort and a lot of cognitive dissonance.
Really? Like guilt.
Oh, immense guilt. They are highly aware they're causing pain, and human beings generally possess an aversion to inflicting harm. They feel terrible, which frequently leads to incredibly clumsy exits.
Which ironically makes it worse for the other person, because meanwhile, the person being rejected is just drowning in humiliation. The source explicitly notes they're experiencing a perceived loss of social or romantic worth. You are suddenly seeing yourself through what you assume is their highly critical gaze, like looking in that funhouse mirror.
And here is where those three dimensions become crucial. The way we choose to deliver the news dictates whether that funhouse mirror shatters their self-esteem completely or leaves it relatively intact.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because if we look at the modern dating landscape, we absolutely have to talk about the most controversial form of delivery out there, which is indirect rejection.
Ah, yes.
I am talking, of course, about ghosting.
The phenomenon that pretty much defines modern digital romance.
Completely. And look, if you are listening to this right now and thinking, no, ghosters are just cowards who don't respect people, I completely hear you.
Yeah, that's the prevailing internet narrative for sure.
Right. They're heartless, they lack empathy, they just vanish into thin air.
Yep.
But reading through the data in this source, we are forced to look at this differently. I want to look at the protective or, psychological reasons for this abrupt disappearance, because the research proves it is rarely just pure malice.
It really isn't.
Hmm.
The data on ghosting is full of counterintuitive findings. I mean, let's acknowledge that yes, it can signal emotional immaturity or a lack of conflict resolution skills, obviously.
Yeah.
But psychologically, ghosting is very frequently an immediate self-protective response to a perceived romantic offense.
Like a breach of trust or an uncomfortable boundary violation or just a major red flag on a date.
Exactly. The ghoster feels threatened, so instead of navigating a potentially confrontational explanation, they just pull the ripcord and vanish.
Which makes sense when you look at the gender dynamics behind this, because it highlights exactly how societal conditioning plays a role here. Women actually tend to ghost more frequently than men.
Yes, they do.
And the underlying mechanism is often deeply rooted in valid safety concerns. Because engaging in a direct rejection, like literally telling a man, I am not interested, can be a physically dangerous act.
It really can.
Wow.
It can provoke an externalization of blame from the man, which manifests as aggression, verbal abuse, or even stalking.
Which is terrifying.
Right. So for many women, indirect delivery, like blocking contact, isn't a lack of etiquette. It is a calculated survival strategy.
Yeah. But the psychological flip side for men is just as complex, right? Because the research notes that men, when rejecting someone, might use indirect methods defensively to protect their own masculine identity or just avoid feeling inadequate during a highly emotional conversation.
Yeah. Men often avoid the emotional heavy lifting. But when we look at how women process being rejected, the source points out a pretty devastating societal link.
What's that?
Well, women are frequently conditioned to tie their baseline self-esteem to perceived physical attractiveness,
Oh, wow.
which means the scope of the rejection artificially expands in the brain. So a man saying, I don't think we are a good match, is internalized by the woman's brain as a direct critique of her physical body.
That is so dark.
Yeah, the romantic rejection transmutes directly into severe body dissatisfaction.
I actually noticed in the source this term, rejection sensitivity, which just seems like the gasoline poured onto that specific fire.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounded to me like having a faulty smoke detector in your brain that goes off and triggers the sprinklers just because someone in the kitchen burned a piece of toast. Is that neurologically what's happening?
That is a phenomenal way to describe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, individuals with high rejection sensitivity have this overactive threat detection system. They overinterpret entirely ambiguous cues.
Give me an example of that.
So if a partner takes 3 hours to text back, a person with normative sensitivity assumes, oh, they're in a meeting or they're busy.
Right. Normal stuff.
But a highly rejection-sensitive person's brain treats the silence as an active threat, concluding, they're losing interest, I am fundamentally unlovable, and they were preparing to abandon me.
It just turns into a catastrophic self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, exactly.
They're so terrified of that funhouse mirror that they start seeing its distorted reflection everywhere, even when their partner is literally just holding up a regular, clear piece of glass.
And the psychological toll of that is just immense. The data shows these individuals report drastically lower relationship satisfaction, they initiate higher conflict, they experience way more jealousy, and get this, they even engage in partner aggression to preemptively protect themselves from the abandonment they are hallucinating.
That is wild. Which actually brings us to the twist about ghosting that genuinely shocked me.
The Park and Klein study.
Yes, because despite the absolute cultural consensus that ghosting is the worst possible outcome, the data from Park and Klein shows it doesn't always produce worse outcomes than direct rejection.
Right, because we have this cultural obsession with closure.
Yes.
We assume that a detailed explanation of why someone is leaving will somehow alleviate the pain.
But the research points out that ghosting can actually prevent hostile interactions and reduce the risk of emotional escalation. Park and Klein discovered that ghosters often care more about the other person's well-being than the rejected person assumes.
Yeah, it's totally counterintuitive.
Right. The ghoster might be sitting there thinking, well, if I tell them the real reason I'm leaving, that I find their personality grating or their ambition completely lacking it, will absolutely crush them.
Right.
So it is actually kinder to just disappear and let them assume I'm a massive jerk.
They're prioritizing the rejected person's ego over their own social reputation.
Exactly.
They're basically acting as a villain to save the other person from having to look in that funhouse mirror. It is a form of indirect delivery designed specifically to mitigate the feelings of inferiority that make rejection so traumatizing in the first place.
But wait, if the delivery of a breakup is what causes the trauma, what happens when there is no breakup at all?
Moving to the scope dimension.
Exactly. Shifting from full-scale abandonment to scope, we have to look at what happens when the rejection is only partial. So we're talking about micro-rejections within an ongoing, committed relationship.
Right.
And the most common and honestly historically most painful example of this is sexual rejection.
It is the ultimate psychological stress test for a long-term couple.
The source included these quotes from people navigating this, and the despair was just palpable. One woman simply stated, mismatched libidos are so hard.
Yeah.
A husband shared, eventually you stop asking for sex and your marriage suffers. And your wife says it's because she doesn't feel connected and desired. And another man confessed, not being able to make love is killing me emotionally.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. So if we know that the human brain interprets rejection as a signal of fundamental unworthiness, how do couples survive the inevitable routine sexual rejections that happen simply due to mismatched libidos? Like, how does a brain process not tonight without immediately translating it into you're inadequate?
Well, what's fascinating here is the vital psychological distinction between how we process different scopes of rejection.
Okay.
A whole relationship rejection, like a full breakup, threatens your entire romantic viability in the mating market. But a partial rejection, like a spouse turning down intimacy on a random Tuesday night, is only targeting a specific behavior at a specific moment in time.
Emotionally, though, it doesn't feel like a specific behavior. I mean, if you lean in to kiss your partner and they pull away, it feels like a total rejection of your physical being.
And that is the cognitive trap.
Right.
The brain conflates a temporary physiological state with a global assessment of worth. The required reframing here is understanding that when one partner isn't in the mood, it is almost entirely a biological or environmental mismatch.
Like what?
Like fatigue or cortisol from work stress, hormonal fluctuations, these are the actual culprits. It is incredibly rare that a partner's lack of libido is some sudden, calculated realization that they find you physically repulsive.
Right. But knowing that logically in your prefrontal cortex and feeling it emotionally in your amygdala are two entirely different experiences. So how do couples actively bridge that gap?
This is where we circle back to Dr. Benzie's dimensions. The research proves that the manner of the rejection is the critical variable.
The delivery and tone.
Precisely. Relationship satisfaction depends far less on whether the actual answer to a sexual advance is yes or no, and much more on how and why the message is communicated.
Interesting.
Yeah, a warm, reassuring no rarely damages the foundational trust of the relationship.
Give me an example of a warm no.
So if a partner says, my brain is completely fried from work today, and I am absolutely exhausted, but I love you, you look amazing, and I want to connect this weekend, that entirely shifts the emotional payload.
Oh, totally.
It provides immediate, explicit context that separates the rejection from the partner's self-worth.
It proactively dismantles the feeling of inferiority before it can even take root.
Exactly.
It's the difference between a partner silently turning their back and pulling up the blankets versus, pulling you close, kissing your forehead and saying, I'm just too drained tonight. The physical outcome, meaning no sex, is identical,
Right.
but the psychological aftermath is completely different.
Because the latter approach uses tone to reinforce social value, ensuring the partial rejection doesn't metastasize into a perceived whole relationship rejection.
So what does this all mean for how we communicate outside the bedroom, like in the broader dating world?
Well, it changes everything.
Because the manner of a no seems to be the ultimate determining factor in preserving a person's dignity. Which brings us to the final dimension, tone and the actual psychological motility of politeness.
Yes, the cliches.
Right. We constantly mock those classic breakup cliches. It's not you, it's me. You deserve someone who can give you more. We just roll our eyes and call them hollow, fake platitudes.
Do these supposedly empty phrases actually serve a real psychological purpose?
They absolutely do. In the realm of psychology, we call this cognitive reframing through externalizing blame.
Okay, what does that mean in plain English? Basically, warm politeness is the antidote to the feelings of inferiority we explored at the start of this deep dive. When someone uses a phrase like "it's not you, it's me," they are doing something deeply empathetic. They are voluntarily absorbing the fault for the incompatibility.
Oh, wow. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah, they're explicitly handing the rejected person a narrative that says, "Do not look in the funhouse mirror. This isn't about your flaws, it is about my limitations," or simply a structural lack of fit.
They are engineering a narrative that protects the other person's ego.
Exactly.
And we see this evolving with digital communication too, because the source points out that online daters use highly flexible strategies. They balance the need for directness, ensuring the no is unequivocal, so there's no false hope, with softer, mitigating language to avoid causing a traumatic emotional response.
Dr. Benziev actually brings in a brilliant analogy from the corporate world to illustrate the mechanics of
Oh, the firing analogy.
Yes. Consider a manager who has to fire an employee. If the manager sits them down and says, "We have to let you go because of external economic pressures and departmental budget cuts," it eases the emotional burden.
Right. The employee retains their professional dignity. They can go home and tell their family, hey, the company is downsizing.
Exactly. And that is vastly different from a manager saying, "We are firing you because your work is sloppy and you are totally incompetent."
Right, but the end result is identical. The person is unemployed. But one version leaves them capable of confidently applying for their next job, while the other completely destroys their professional confidence.
That's the power of externalizing blame.
You know, the puzzle piece analogy is what people usually use here, saying we're just two puzzle pieces that don't fit. But that always felt a little too, I don't know, juvenile to me.
Yeah, big cliche.
But reading this research, it feels much more like an organ transplant.
Ooh, I like that.
Right. Like the heart itself is perfectly healthy, a marvel of biology. But the recipient's immune system just doesn't have the right markers. It is a biochemical mismatch. The heart didn't fail, the host body didn't fail, the environment just wasn't a match.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it. Polite romantic rejection reinforces the truth that flourishing relationships depend entirely on environmental and emotional compatibility.
Yeah.
Incompatibility is not a personal failure, and ending an unsuitable relationship with polite respect is a profound acknowledgement of that shared humanity.
So to bring all of this together for you listening, whether you are currently navigating the absolute psychological confusion of being ghosted after 3 really great dates, or you're managing the delicate emotional dance of a mismatched libido in a decades-long marriage, or you are simply staring at a polite but firm breakup text on your phone.
We've all been there.
We really have. The core takeaway from Dr. Benziev's research is universal. Rejection hurts so deeply because our evolutionary wiring instinctively internalizes it as a fatal personal flaw. We view it as an indictment of our worth.
But by understanding the mechanics behind it, the delivery, the scope, and the tone, we can actively begin to separate our intrinsic self-worth from what is, honestly, 99% of the time, a simple case of incompatibility.
Right. We can finally put down the funhouse mirror.
This raises an important question, though, and it's a concept I want to leave everyone chewing on.
Okay, let's hear it.
We spent this time applying rejection sensitivity strictly to romantic dynamics, how people overinterpret ambiguous cues from a partner or a date.
Right.
But if we know that the human brain operates this way, how might that same invisible sensitivity be secretly sabotaging our platonic friendships or our workplace interaction?
Oh, wow.
Think about your own life.
Mm-hmm.
How many times have you felt ghosted by a close friend who didn't text back right away?
Guilty.
Or felt dismissed by a colleague in a meeting and you completely misinterpreted their chaotic, overwhelmed schedule as a devastating, deliberate personal rejection against you?
That is so true.
We are constantly scanning for threats to our social worth well beyond just our romantic lives.
That completely reframes the way you look at almost every unreturned text message in your phone right now.
It really does.
It is not just romantic partners holding up that funhouse mirror. Sometimes we are the ones holding it up to ourselves based on completely innocent, mundane behavior from our friends and coworkers.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us. We hope this exploration gives you a powerful new lens to view your own relationships, a better understanding of the science of connection, and maybe just a little more grace for yourself the next time you face a no.
Yeah, remember, you are not a flawed or broken vase.
You simply encountered an environment that wasn't a match. Take these insights, apply them to your own life, and we will catch you on the next one.